Hey ExJWs, thanks again for stopping by. If you're new to the channel, my name is Riley and I'm a former Jehovah's Witness. And today I'm interviewing Alison Ruth Schmitt, a former Jehovah's Witness from the UK who's now living in America. Alison left the organisation in 1991 while still a teenager, but didn't wake up to the truth about the truth until much later in 2017, and she'd like to share her story with us. Alison, how are you today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you, Riley. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Absolutely.
Right. So, how are things where you are at the moment?
Good, really good. I live in New Mexico in Santa Fe, and it's gorgeous here. The weather's really nice. We have a very warm spring, as you might imagine, and yeah, I'm doing good. Thank you. I have a small business out here that I'm just getting started up.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I'm busy, but really enjoying life here. It's a good place to live.
Oh, great, great. So, please tell us a bit about your history and your experience as a Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was born in 1972, and I had I was raised in a single parent family. My parents split up when I was about two and a half. And there was some spousal abuse in the home. And my parents, although they legally separated, they actually never divorced because Jehovah's Witnesses, and that was a sort of a strange atmosphere to grow up in. Kind of being aware that my dad had been a bad actor. He was the abusive spouse. And then my dad very abruptly kind of leaving the family home when I was sort of two and a half. You know, you're in that almost sort of pre-verbal stage of life. So it impacted me very deeply, but I think I really internalized it. I didn't really know what to do with that. And so, you know, it was just me and my mum from that point onwards, really. And we were, I guess, you know, a somewhat sort of peripheral family in the congregation. I think just by dint of being a single parent family, you know, you're never going to be one of the alpha families. But we were, I mean, you know, the organization felt so different back then, so it definitely felt more kind of close-knit, I suppose. And so, you know, we were like not badly treated in the congregation, but it's more like looking back now, I can see that we were, you know, sort of peripheral, B-list, C-list family. And yeah, so, you know, I grew up, I was obedient, I towed the line. I had a very close relationship with my mum just because it was a sort of only child, single parent situation. So we were very much like a sort of a unit. And then around 18, I started to really chafe against the restrictions of the organization. I saw my school friends and peers really begin to blossom. Their lives began to really open up. They really started to come into themselves. They got a lot more freedoms. They started to date, obviously, have really kind of interesting experiences. They would come back to school and report all of this. And I just felt like I was basically still living like an 11 or 12-year-old, you know, on a tight leash, going through the same routines, same motions, absolutely no prospect of going out, having fun, having a boyfriend, experiencing anything new. And it really started to kind of, it began to eat at me. It really ate away at me. I started to really realize that basically my life was never going to change. that I was always going to be in this sort of semi-childlike state of not really being able to kind of be who I was, express myself, connect with other people, experience life the way that I really wanted to. And by the oh, and also, you know, my friends were all going off to university, so there was this sort of big break coming where this sort of cocoon and structure of school was about to kind of go away, and I was about to be adrift in life without them, without even the kind of release of going to school. Not that school was easy, but I was very academic, so it was one place where I could, you know, kind of express myself and do things and sort of be praised for something other than going door to door or commenting at the meetings, you know?
Yeah.
And so things really came to a head in my 18th year. There was also a boy at school that I really liked, and that he liked me as well, and we were kind of having to do this even though we liked each other. And it was this realization that I could have this, like I could have him, I could have this relationship if it wasn't for being in the organization. And so when school actually finished in the summer, early summer of my 18th year, which I guess would be 1990, summer holidays kicked in, and I actually had a place at art college, but it was just like art college that I could go on the bus to and come home. You know, I wasn't leaving, but I got a place to do a foundation course at art college, and I was allowed to do that. And I fell into a deep depression that summer, a really deep depression. I didn't go out. I stayed indoors. I didn't go out. I didn't, you know, attempt to see anybody. And after a few months of that, I actually attempted suicide. I slashed my wrists, and I really felt that, like, well, what was the point of going forward, because there was nothing in front of me other than more of this. And, you know, my mum found me in the middle of trying to slash my wrist in the middle of the night. In the bathroom, which was kind of funny and ironic because the flat we lived in was so tiny. It's like you couldn't even breathe without the other person knowing. And I remember thinking at the time, actually finding it kind of funny, because I was like, oh, like that's so typical. Like I can't even kill myself without her interfering. And I really remember that, and just thinking, wow, that's like that. This is actually comical. Sorry, I'm a little emotional recalling this.
It's no problem at all. It's perfectly understandable.
It's fine. I'm happy to talk about it, but it is like, wow, you know, yeah, it brings up feelings. So that's what happened. And I seem to remember that my mother said something like, "Oh, well, you know, we won't tell the elders." It was almost like, you just tried to kill yourself, but don't worry, like we won't, like I won't like turn you over to the elders. I was like, oh, thanks.
Yeah.
It'll just be between us, you know. And I can remember going to the meetings after that with my wrists like heavily bandaged, and nobody you know, said a word, or I mean, I guess what were they gonna say? But it was everyone, like no one acted like they noticed. I've got like bandages on my wrists. It's like, So basically, yeah, I just, you know, I continued to go through the motions the rest of that year. And then my birthday is in January. I turned 19 in January 1991. And the way I remember it, it's a little hazy, because at the time I wasn't making any effort to remember this stuff. Like, as I was going through it, I was very much trying to just get rid of it, just forget it, you know, push it away, try to move on. So my memories of leaving are fragmented and hazy in a way that if I was leaving now, I would have a very strong sense of like, I want to remember this to tell my story and go on YouTube
Yeah.
or whatever. But there was no outlet for that. So to me, it was just something negative that I was trying to kind of push away. But basically, yeah, by the spring of the following year, as I remember it, I was starting to, it just began to slowly dawn on me that maybe I could actually leave. And the truth is I had no reason to disbelieve the religion. It was, I think what allowed me to leave was the acknowledgement that I very much wanted to experience life. I wanted to live. I didn't want to be held in this grey, structured, kind of passionless life.
Yeah.
I think what I actually came to terms in my mind with the idea that if I was going to die at Armageddon, I had made peace with that. And that I would rather leave and live for a while and be killed by Jehovah. I reached that point in my mind where I was like, okay, you know what? If that's what's going to happen, I accept it because it's more important to me to experience life. So there was that, and there was just this feeling that I had that why would Jehovah make me with all of this intellect and all of these passions and interests and desires, and why would he create me so full of life, ready to live, and then not allow me to live? You know? Not allow me to experience life. And I just thought, that doesn't make sense. It's just like, why would you create me with all of this zest for life and not allow me to fulfill that? And then I just thought, you know what? If that's who God really is, I don't want to worship a God like that. He doesn't deserve my worship. He's put me in an impossible situation. So I think it was resolving those things in my mind. The willingness to die. God, I feel like a psychologist would have a lot to say about that, because I've heard other ex-witnesses say the same thing, that they had to come to terms with being willing to die in order to leave.
I remember coming to exactly the same conclusion myself. I mean, when I still believed in him, believed he was real, I actually had that conversation with him one night. I actually said, you know, I'm not coming back to you. And if that means that I'm going to die, then so be it. I would rather live my life and, you know, be happy with, you know, my new partner than come back to you and be miserable. And you know, I distinctly remember having that conversation.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember saying in a prayer, I said, if at Armageddon, even if at Armageddon you give me one final chance and say, here is the new system and everlasting life on the left, and here is your partner and the world and everlasting destruction on the right, I said, I'll choose the right. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah.
And think about that. Think about what it takes for a person to have to literally be ready to die, to have to come to that point in their mind, because, you know, like you say, you still believe that this is real and that this is really going to happen. That you have to come to this point in your mind where you are ready to, you know, be annihilated by this kind of unseen force. I mean, I think from a psychological point of view, from a psychiatric point of view, like, what does that take? And what does that even mean, that like a human being has to have that sort of win that battle with themselves?
I think it's a big indication that the religion takes away your freedom, because freedom is one of those things that people will gladly risk their life for.
True.
And I think that's what it is. It's because being a Jehovah's Witness, you're not free. But freedom is so precious. You know, people will do anything for it.
I agree. I agree with you.
Yeah.
Yes, you are right. But it is kind of extraordinary that's where we have to go to in order to free ourselves mentally enough to leave. So anyway, basically, yeah, I had that, I had those conversations with myself and at 19 and resolved gradually over months that I think I could leave, and I began to try to formulate a kind of a concept of a life outside of the organization, which for someone who was born in, it's an extraordinary set of mental gymnastics that is required to envisage yourself outside of this framework that has been all you have ever known and is all that's ever been truly real to you. But somehow I got far enough down that thought process or into that thought process that I started to feel ready to leave. Now, I was still living at home and I had no idea whether my mother would shun me or not. I didn't know if I would be kicked out of the home. I knew on some level that I probably should wait until I had an income, a job. But to be honest with you, the kind of person I am is once I resolve to do something, it's very difficult for me to wait. I guess I need to kind of go through it. I need to strike while the iron's hot. I'm that kind of person.
Right.
And I was ready, and I guess I also was just craving change. So I remember one day going out on field service and knowing that this would be my last time going on field service. And I can actually remember that day very clearly. I can remember being out there, going from door to door, and being in such a completely different place in my mind. And knowing that I was going to tell my mum when we got home that I wasn't going to be going anymore. And we got home, and at some point later that afternoon, I mustered the courage to tell her that I wasn't going to the meetings anymore. And, that was incredibly hard. She was very upset. And, I guess I don't know if she was initially angry or more bargaining and reasoning initially. I think that she probably was more trying to talk me down off the ledge initially. And I just said I wasn't going anymore, and I probably said I don't believe it anymore, which wouldn't have been entirely true because I wasn't awake. But I disbelieved it enough to feel that I could, I don't know, it's hard to say really where my head was at, but I had resolved that I was going. And essentially, then the anger definitely came in probably a little later, maybe a few days later or something. The defensiveness, the kind of accusatory, I suppose, attitude from my mum, where I was really the bad guy. And also I'm sure there must have been questions about, what was I doing? Had I sinned? That kind of thing. I had not. I was still a virgin. I was not secretly dating somebody. I really hadn't done anything. And then some indeterminate period later, but it probably wasn't very long after that, I'm sure it wasn't more than a couple of weeks after that, the elder ambush happened.
Right, yeah.
And basically they sat me down and did the classic, well, we understand you don't want to go anymore, like, what's happened? And the reality is I couldn't really exactly tell them why or what had happened. Because again, I wasn't armed with all of this knowledge. I couldn't go, oh, the child abuse scandal, crisis of conscience. That was all, none of that existed for me. All I knew in my gut was that I couldn't stay anymore. It was killing me. It was destroying me spiritually, emotionally, psychologically. And I didn't really have language to express that to them. And so I probably just kept saying, I don't believe anymore. I think I was just trying to find some kind of phrase that would encompass it, but it was very difficult. And, excuse me. And basically what they did is that they're sitting over there on the other side of the room. My mum's on one side, I guess. I'm sitting on the other side of the living room. And I remember them saying, is it drugs? Is it because you want to take drugs? Is it boys? And oh my God, I was so outraged. Because in that moment, and the way that they said it, it was so clear that they just saw me as some stupid little girl who was being led astray by the most trivial and petty things. And that it was that simple. It couldn't be anything to do with the organization. It had to be just some petty failing in me, just some stupid little whim that I was following. Or maybe I had a crush on a boy or something, And the thing is, I was 19. I was like an adult. I was a grown woman. But they were so condescending, so insulting. And also, Riley, the fact that, like we just said, I had to come to terms with my own death. I had to go through such deep and painful and difficult stuff in my mind to even get to that point where I was sitting there. And then they came in with the most trivial and insulting assumptions about me. And I'm sad to say that I was so overwhelmed in that moment that I burst into tears, which is the worst thing I could have done. Because all that did was reinforce to them that I was probably conflicted, I didn't know what I was doing, and that I was just this stupid little girl. But I started crying because I didn't have the language to tell them what was going on with me, and I was so insulted and demeaned in that moment. And so that's how that went.
I mean, it just, from what you're saying, it just goes to show how this organization is extremely narcissistic, and it encourages a narcissistic attitude in its members. The more indoctrinated you are, the more like a narcissist you behave. And narcissists can never, ever understand or accept that you want to leave because of them.
Yes.
Narcissists don't handle rejection well at all. They will believe that it's any other reason under the sun, but it could never, their mind will not even go there, that it's because of them. And that's exactly what the organization is like. It just can't accept that anyone would willingly leave because there's a problem with the organization. So it's got to be because you want to sin, or because, you found somebody in the world who's leading you away, or because, as you mentioned in your own experience, drugs or anything else. It will be every other reason except that the organization is broken.
So true, Riley.
Yeah.
And let me be honest, I did want to have sex.
Of course.
And I did want to experiment with drugs. Sure, I was 19. Yes, I wanted those things. But was that the reason I was leaving? Absolutely not. No, it was not. It was something so much deeper. And at the end of the day, it was like my gut, my deepest inner, the part of you that's really deep, that's sort of intact regardless of everything that goes on, that kind of knows what to do.
Yeah.
It was like my gut was just telling me, leave, you just got to get out. But again, I didn't have the language. I had no framework for explaining this to them. And it might be difficult for someone leaving now to understand that, given that there is so much discussion about this, so much talk about it, so much objective reality about how the organization is, how we've been manipulated, what, religious abuse, religious trauma is, all of that. But I didn't have any language like that to be able to hit them with all these incisive reasons. So that was it, really. And I just remember crying. I was upset. It didn't really go anywhere. Except that I felt demeaned, and I also was angry with myself that I had cried in front of them. And you can see that I'm still emotional about it. But now I absolutely can't be angry at myself, because my God, it's I actually handled it pretty well in many ways. And of course I'm not still angry with myself. I was in an impossible situation. And still essentially indoctrinated and very disempowered because of just being raised as a woman in that organization. So anyway, they left. And I remember afterwards just railing at my mother. I was like, how could you do that? And because she had set the whole thing up,
Yeah.
But I remember that really ruptured my trust in her. And it definitely added to an already fractured relationship that we had, which was, yes, fractured by me declaring that I wanted to leave, but also fractured on my end by my resentment of the years of control that she had wielded over me, and how much she had crushed my spirit and kind of bent me out of shape, I would say. I felt really like I had been distorted through this process of being raised like that. I was beginning to get a glimpse of how problematic that upbringing had been, and how difficult I was, going to find it, kind of trying to rebuild my life. I was getting a glimpse of it, and I was angry. Yeah, I was full of rage, really, to be honest with you. A lot of negative feelings at that time. So I think what happened, and again, it's hazy, it's not very clear, but I think essentially what happened was that the elders would not accept my verbal declaration that I was done. That was sort of that was kind of the upshot of that meeting or whatever, that they wouldn't accept it. And I think there was some talk about, look, why don't you just take a break, just take a few months, take a break from the meetings, and then think about kind of coming back. And after that humiliation, and after understanding very clearly how low of an opinion they had of me, there was no way that I was just going to kind of ride the coattails of that offer. And so I wrote a letter of disassociation. And what happened next is, again, very hazy. I don't remember whether I gave it to them, delivered it to them, and they still didn't accept my letter. But I definitely remember having to make a big effort to get them to accept that I was done. It's really vague, but essentially whether or not they accepted it the first time, eventually they accepted my letter. They had to. I told them I meant it and it was real. I wish I would have kept a copy of it. I think it was handwritten, because this is 1991. I didn't have a computer or a printer. I think I handwrote it in cursive, one copy, signed it, put it in an envelope. Now I really wish I had a copy of it, because I'd love to reread it and see what I actually said. But I think it was short and sweet that I was done. And after some toing and froing, they had to accept it, and I was announced maybe a month or so later. Again, the time frame is hazy, and I remember that my mum knew the meeting where they were going to announce me, and I remember telling her not to go. I just said, why go and sit there while they announce me? Just don't go tonight or whatever. And my mom was adamant that she must go. So she went and came home, and I'd been announced, and like, for me, it was great. I was thrilled that they'd finally had accepted, you know. And the thing is, it's interesting now when I see people leaving, and there's always discussions online about, oh, should I write the letter? And people are like, no, don't write the letter. You're playing by their rules. Screw them. And I'm just like, look, you know what? Everyone's different. Everyone's circumstances is different. But I am the staunchest advocate for writing the letter personally. For me, it was so important for me to write a letter that, yes, played by their rules, but the key to that was that they had to acknowledge it because it's their rules. They couldn't ignore me any longer. They couldn't discount me as some foolish little girl. They had to take it seriously because I did it, you know, I followed their bureaucracy. And as much as they kind of didn't want to announce me, you know, I mean, they were pretty much begging me, don't do this, don't leave. They didn't want to announce me. My mum desperately didn't want me to leave. And the fact that I just basically, by writing that letter, just it was like I cut through all of that BS and all of that resistance because they couldn't ignore the letter. And I love that. I love that I did that. It was such a strong statement of standing in my own power. For me, it was taking back my power, not giving them power. I took the power and I said, screw you. Just like if you're in a horrible job, how much more satisfying is it to go into your boss's office and say, fuck you and fuck your job and walk out, right, in the middle of the shift, rather than he fires you. That's how I see it. And for me, personally, it was such a point of pride that at 19, I wrote that letter knowing how final it would be and knowing they'd announce me and all of that and knowing that potentially now I'm going to be shunned. And I did it anyway. So I'm just going to say that's my position on it. Yes, you're playing by their rules, but here's the thing. That world is absolutely real to them. Those rules are real to them. That bureaucracy is real to them. They live by it. They die by it. And if you basically, within the framework of that, basically give them the finger, I don't know. To me, that I don't see how you're losing in that scenario at all. But you know what? I mean, again, I'm only expressing from my point of view in the context of what I went through, how significant it was for me to disassociate, you know, and to sort of, it did give me a lot of a feeling of control and empowerment, even though I know not everyone sees it that way. A lot of people are like, oh, you did it their way. And I'm like, well, but again, it's like their way matters to them. So, yeah. And also, again, you got to remember, this is a totally different era. You know, all I was trying to do was basically just try to get my feet under me and to get them off my back. I didn't want any more elder visits or people bugging me and questioning my decision-making process and all of that. And this was, to me, the most effective way of just, like, cutting the cord and, like, removing their hand off of me, you know. Or their hand on the back of my neck, you know. It was the quickest way of getting that hand off. And to this day, I'm really proud I did that. So there we are, you know.
So what happened next after you disassociated? How did your life turn out?
Well, that's a big question. Honestly, it was really tough. It was really, really hard. I can't pretend that it wasn't. I left home at 21, so I was still at home for the next couple of years. You know, I made a lot of choices. Not a lot of choices, but I made some choices that I wouldn't have made if I wasn't in that situation. But my need to start work and leave home was so strong. The atmosphere in the home was very, very poisonous, very toxic. Obviously it caused a huge rupture in our relationship. Things were just never the same. My mum didn't shun me, and she let me stay at home, which, I'm very grateful for. It would have been really hard to be kicked out at that time in my life with no support network or anything. And my mum still doesn't shun me to this day. I left home at 21. Basically, a bad decision I made was I got a place on a degree course at a really good college to do a graphic design degree at the London College of Printing, as it was then, which was a really great school to go to. And I got a place and I turned it down, which is bad decision number one. And the reason why is because I couldn't face another 3 years living at home. And I really didn't know how to go out and support myself, kind of working part-time and everything while I was in college. Again, you have to remember, I had no expectation of this. I had never had any coaching about how you function at college and live, and it was just too daunting. And so I turned down that place on a really good degree program that probably would have, given me a good income and a good career. And I just took a 1-year course, quick in and out, kind of like BTEC course or something, just to get some kind of skill set. And then I went out into work. And it was interesting because it's like that low start, not being qualified to do better jobs and just doing kind of low-end work, low-end graphic design work, and kind of getting jobs that I didn't really want to get. Like, one of my first jobs was working in like a pronto print shop, where you might design a business card or something here and there, but it was very mundane. And so I ended up kind of at a much lower level of employment than I should have from my abilities. And that, honestly, that has dogged me my whole life. It's just never really leveling up employment wise. I moved out of home. I got my own flat in North London, and then I subsequently moved around North London. Moving was a very big part of my life. I was constantly searching, I think, for some kind of niche or some kind of situation where I would feel normal. And I never felt normal anywhere. I never felt like I fitted in. I had such difficulty making friends, building relationships, such incredible difficulty. Now, if I could have done it over, I would have immediately gotten therapy. At the time, I really didn't know what was wrong with me, to be honest with you. I knew that I'd had a very dislocated upbringing. I knew I didn't fit in at school. But I kind of thought, well, all of that's behind me now, so all I have to do is just act like everyone else and my life will be normal. Just do what all those other people are doing and I'll get the things that they have. I'll get social networks and friends and good times and a boyfriend and all of this stuff. And it did not happen. I was so isolated and was really quite weird. When I look back now at the first few jobs I had, the way I behaved in the workplace was I was odd. I didn't have good social skills. I didn't know how to kind of roll with that environment. I would say weird, out of place things that were inappropriate or didn't make sense. I was really, really socially stunted. And I really, really struggled. I didn't have a friend network from school to fall back on. I had never had close friends in the congregation, so it wasn't like I was missing friends I'd had in the congregation, because I was kind of a loner in the congregation too. But I will say that if I had had a better social life while in the organization, I at least would have developed some of the skills that you need in order to kind of know what that even feels like. or to build those people around you, and I had none of that. And I genuinely thought that all I had to do was just move on from this, put it behind me, and that normal things would happen to me, and they did not. Now, after having discovered the ExJW online community since 2017 and having been in Facebook groups and listened to YouTube videos, now I understand that I definitely have CPTSD. I've self-diagnosed that because I've read books about it and I check like every box. I know I have religious trauma syndrome. I know that I have, probably mild personality disorder from my upbringing. And all of these things were so alive and in play at that time. And I just didn't know why I couldn't connect. Why people seemed to sort of I felt like I was made of glass. Like people just slid off me. Like I couldn't mesh with people. I was odd. I was definitely developmentally stunted. I didn't understand social cues, and it was really an agonizing time, to be honest with you, because I'm in my early 20s. More than anything, I'm desperate for friends. I desperately want a partner. And finding those things felt like finding a unicorn. It was so, so difficult. And so, I was isolated. I spent most of my time alone. I went to work, I came home, I spent the evening at home on my own. I went out and did things on my own. And when I finally met the first guy that I ever dated, which I was 22 at that point, my pattern with unavailable men began. So because of all that damage, because of all of those psychological issues, I basically attracted my first unavailable man, and my love life from then on was set in that pattern. So it's been a struggle. It's been tough. Finding the ExJW community has been like balm to my soul. To hear so many other people talk about the same struggles has helped me enormously.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I mean, doing these interviews and, since I've gotten involved in activism, and it's just the same things over and over and over again that come up, the same things, the same struggles, feeling stunted, feeling like a child. I've been through all of those things myself as well, going out into the world and making friends and forming a new social network. All of those things are just so incredibly difficult. And there's been times where I've actually felt like an alien. I felt like I'm an alien, have to learn a whole new social etiquette, and even just like things in everyday life, just like I feel like I'm pretending to be an adult rather than actually being an adult. Sometimes I just feel like I'm like when kids play dress up and they pretend to be grown-ups, and a lot of the time I feel like I'm just pretending to be a grown-up and I'm not actually one, because I feel so stunted. Yes,
it is. It's like I feel that I've sort of built an external persona that's actually, it's very convincing. I mean, I'm naturally an introvert, but I sort of have an extroverted side that really wants expression. And, I do struggle with how to sort of put that side of me out there while still protecting the introvert side. I've definitely learned more to balance that over the years, but I think what I've done is I've given my extrovert side the task of managing my image. And it's weird because people meet me and they're like, oh, you're so bubbly and extroverted, you seem like such a people person. And I'm like, this is working really well for me, because inside I'm just like this, like I have no idea, you know, it's like, oh, I made another social mistake. I don't know what's going on. Why do I still feel so isolated? It's like I'm still kind of alone in here. Yeah, it's really interesting just how it is like a split personality in many ways. I think our job, Riley, is to find a way of integrating the well, I'm not going to say broken, but the damaged and kind of uncertain and sort of messy interior part of us with the kind of more accomplished exterior. I think our task is to integrate the two, to merge them so that they become one functioning person rather than these two separate things that we have to go through life with.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. I mean, I've heard before, I'm not sure who it was who said it, but I've heard this quote that everyone has like two personas. There's the one that you are inside and the one you show to everyone else. And the more alike those two personas are, the happier you are. And the more different they are is the more unhappy you are. And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
There really is. I couldn't agree more. I definitely want to connect with more ExJWs in real life. Like, I'm really craving that. Living in New Mexico, there isn't a big ExJW community here. And I haven't met any ExJWs in person since I was actually in New York some years ago, just on a vacation, and I managed to connect with a few of the New York ExJWs, and just sitting with them in a coffee shop was the most extraordinary feeling, talking to people who use the same phraseology and understand the words of organize, and just finding so much commonality even in just an hour or two in a coffee shop with just a few people. It was the most extraordinary, liberating, nourishing experience for me. And so I ideally and deeply want to connect in person with ExJWs. The online community is great, but I crave personal, one-to-one interaction, yes.
I mean, I haven't myself been to an ExJW meetup, not in person anyway, because I didn't wake up until after Corona had already hit. So everything's just online now. So I can't wait for the restrictions over here to lift so that I can actually, because I've made quite a few ExJW friends now, really good friends that I would just love to spend some in-person time with. But unfortunately, the restrictions don't allow. So I'm really, really looking forward to when they're gone. The restrictions are gone so that we can all meet up in person. I literally cannot wait.
Well, I actually belong to the UK ExJW Facebook group that they allowed me to join because I'm British and I was raised, in the organisation in the UK. And, the next time I come back to the UK, I'm really hoping that somehow I can coordinate it with a meetup, because I would love to meet all of you.
Do you come back to the UK often?
Usually about once a year. And I'm long overdue for a visit because of coronavirus. I would have already been back by now. So it would be great to...
That would be really good for you.
Really good for me, because again, I do feel also the culture of the Jehovah's Witnesses is different in the UK than in the US. If I see another post about cheese danishes and Shasta Cola at the conventions, I'm going to scream. I'm like, we didn't have that. That's nothing to do with us. There was no cheese danishes at Bowes Road or Twickenham.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm so keen to get more UK ExJWs onto my channel. And that's why I was so pleased, when I got that initial message from you. Because when I was waking up, there still are very few, very, very few, ExJW witnesses, ExJW activists on YouTube, apart from Lloyd, obviously, but they're mostly based in the US. And I think it would have been really, really great to have seen some UK ones. I mean, there are a couple more now, but I would really, really love to see more. I would love to see more because, as you said, that there is a cultural difference.
There really is, and also I am on a quest to find some people that I knew when I was in. I have not yet found anybody from my previous congregation or anybody who knew me then. And it's tricky because, I mean, basically I was still a teenager when I left. I didn't have an adult life in the organization. So there are lots of people that might have known me as a child, but might not necessarily connect that with like who I am now. They might, and of course you're not necessarily going to remember the kids in the organization. I'd love to meet someone who's around my age who maybe left maybe a little before me or a little after me. I still hold out hope of finding people who are from London Paddington congregation, if anyone's out there, and was in the org in the 70s and 80s or early 90s. I'd love to connect with you. It would be really good to share those specific memories of that congregation, those people, that Kingdom Hall,
Well, you never know, this video might reach some of them.
It might, and that would be very exciting. So it's been, honestly, it's been a rough journey, and I do think that there is more to be said about the difference between leaving pre-internet and post-internet. There's a lot to be said about that, and it does get touched on from time to time, but I feel like there's a lot to be said and there are people who left way earlier than me, obviously people left in the 80s and 70s, and obviously prior to that. But it's so interesting to me because, leaving really on just a few years before the internet became a thing, and now I'm thinking, why did it take me so long to find the ExJW community? Why? Why did it take till 2017? And the reason why is because when I left, as I've said, I was trying to I thought that if I just pushed it away, put it in a drawer and closed the file, that I could just live normally. Well, it doesn't work like that. And as time went on, it didn't occur to me that there was any support out there. Because why would I imagine that there was? And even if there was, how would I go about finding it with no internet? How would I find other ExJWs? There was no concept in my mind that you could do that. And in all those years, I never crossed paths with another ExJW. Just didn't even accidentally bump into one.
How did you eventually find the ExJW community and find out, all of this information online? What was that experience like?
Well, in 2017, my husband and I moved from Georgia, Atlanta, to Albuquerque, New Mexico. We made a big move across country. And I think there was just something about maybe my mindset around that time, because it was a huge transition, a period of change. I just started to ruminate. For some reason, I started to think and ruminate about my JW past during that transition, that move. It just sort of started to bubble up for me more. And I just, I remember sort of actually thinking, which is laughable now, I kept thinking, gosh, if only there was like a community of people out there who would talk about this stuff, or if only we were represented somehow in some kind of group or community. And I remember this sadness coming over me, thinking, I just can't believe that something that's still so resonant in my life just isn't being discussed anywhere. And something, probably the same gut, said, why don't you just go and see, just search for Jehovah's Witnesses in the Facebook search bar. And I was like, oh. Wait a minute. And like, how crazy that I was in my, mid 40s. And I just never really looked before. Because the internet had just kind of happened, and I don't know, I was so used to just going it alone, being like this spiritual nomad, this kind of person in exile, just trudging through life, dealing with all of this stuff, in and out of therapy, yes. And I did discuss it in therapy, but it was interesting. In therapy, I would always go and they would be like, why have you come to therapy? Oh, I'm just depressed. Oh, I'm unlucky in love. I can't find a partner. Oh, I'm just, I'm dogged by this sadness. I don't know why. And I was always presenting to therapists for things other than I'm a cult survivor. You know what I mean? And so I would have therapy for depression. I would have therapy. I even did this like group therapy once about like removing your blocks to finding a partner and all of that. Like that was how I was thinking about therapy. I never once went to a therapist saying, I've been in this abusive cult, I need to be deprogrammed or whatever. And so, yes, I have made progress having therapy, but it never got to the core, the root of the problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I was so used to just being this lone person who was just dealing with her issues, struggling in life, couldn't quite understand why after all this time I wasn't just normal by now, why I still felt so alienated, so different, so weird, so I couldn't relate to other people. And I was so used to that I just, for some reason, didn't look, because I didn't think there was anything out there for me. And boom, I look and bam, there it is. And so I'm immediately joining all these groups. I'm immediately starting to talk to people. I'm getting into fights with people really quickly because I'm like I have all of this anger, I still haven't worked through it. And so I'm coming into these groups with all of this anger and all of this kind of scrappy attitude and still super judgmental, partially from being a witness, and partially because, to be honest with you, it was a bit like, I could describe it almost like if you think of like a Western or something. There's like the Western town and everyone's like in the saloon, like hanging out. And this like ragged stranger walks into town and they're all ragged and they've been like living out in the tumbleweed and they've been like eating squirrels and like drinking from like watering holes with like, you know what I mean? And you're all like just covered in thistles and your clothes are all ragged and like you've just been like sleeping outside under the stars and you can hear like the tinkle of the piano from the saloon and like the glow coming through the windows and you're just like, sort of like dragging your like fractured leg in the dirt and everything, and you come in the saloon and like the music stops and everyone turns and looks and you're just like, and you know what, like that's how I felt. Like, I've been out there just like clawing my way through life on my own with no support, no information. And you're all in here in this like warm, cozy like Facebook group. And to be honest with you, it's like I've had to work through a lot of like belligerence and anger and resentment and probably like jealousy as well, in these groups of like... And sometimes I have been too judgmental. So I don't know really what I'm trying to say with that, really. I guess it's interesting. There are these sort of two groups. The people who had the information about the truth to wake up. And the people who didn't, who've stumbled on it later.
Yeah.
To answer your question way back when, yes, I woke up from being in those groups. I fully woke up. I always knew it wasn't the truth. I wasn't, Pomi. I was Pomo. But I had never been given the exact tools and the real reasons to know for sure it was not the truth. I didn't know about the child abuse. I never understood that it was a cult. I just thought, oh, it's a strict religion. When I first heard people say it was a cult, I resisted that like a lot of people do. Because I think of a cult as, Heaven's Gate or Jonestown, or, I think of a cult as something much more extreme, usually with one charismatic leader and all of that stuff that you classically think of a cult as. And it wasn't until I'd heard enough people say that, and then I, read The Bite Model by Stephen Hassan, and then I read, Cult Mind Control and all of that, that I really began to understand, wow, I've survived a cult. I'm a cult survivor. My mother's in a cult. And it's just like, whoa, because I've gone so many years of my life not thinking that, not understanding that, not having that framework. And I think the ExJW community, the greatest gift it's given me is having a context for my experience. Because I just always felt like I was free floating in the world. I knew something was really wrong with me, but I didn't know what it was or why can't I just get over it? Why can't I just transcend it? Why do all these patterns keep repeating in my life? And now I have a context. And that has been the most important thing for me, understanding what I was part of, what was done to me, how I was indoctrinated, what the after effects of that are, why I struggle with X, Y, and Z. That in itself has given me like a quantum leap forward in my healing. It really has.
I can only imagine. It's like if you for a person who's suffering from an illness that is undiagnosed, once they get the diagnosis, it doesn't cure them, but it must be such a relief to finally know what it is that you're suffering with. I can honestly, I can relate to that. I can definitely relate to that.
That's huge. That's a huge piece of it.
The thing that I find as well is that I don't believe that, well, this is just my own personal opinion. I think that we'll never come to a time where we'll be fully healed from being a part of that organization. But that doesn't mean that your progress has to stagnate. I think you can still continue, progressing and developing and healing and getting better and moving forward for the rest of your life. But it's a race that hasn't got a finish line, if you know what I mean.
I completely agree. The finish line is when you die, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
I do agree.
Exactly.
And I'm still trying to build more context for my experience. I'm still trying to understand better where I'm actually at, like how far have I come? Am I more healed than I think I am? And also, at what point does your healing as a cult survivor overlap with just the normal neuroses of everyday people? Because sometimes I think, well, like you said earlier, everyone has a persona. Sorry, I'm snuffly because I'm...
it's okay.
Because I've just been a little teary. Every person out there has a sort of a persona that they show to the world, and one that's behind, that's more tender and delicate and unsure. And, what I'm trying to understand about myself is, where do my issues with the cult end, and where does just me as a regular, normally neurotic person in this world begin,
Yeah, I get that so much. I mean, there were times, shortly after I was disfellowshipped, there were times where I woke up in the morning and I literally did not know who I was. It's like my entire identity had been erased or just removed. Everything that I had used to define myself as a person was gone, and I didn't know who I was. And even sometimes now, when I like reflect on parts of my personality, I think to myself, well, how much of me is actually me, and how much of me is JW me? it's really difficult sometimes to differentiate between the two, or know where one ends and and the other begins, or where they overlap. I totally get what you're saying. It's really difficult.
This is where I think we desperately need more therapists that are ex-JWs or are well trained in the JW experience. Or in the cult survivor experience, if you want to broaden it out a little bit, because I actually definitely see that as an issue for me right now. All the therapy I've done, all the self-help books, all the videos, all the deep thinking, all the self-examination, I'm not quite sure where I am on the spectrum. Like I still feel kind of messed up, but am I in reality way more healed over here? I still think I'm like, oh, I'm still a hot mess, but actually maybe I'm really here, and maybe your average normal person is like there and I'm almost there, and a lot of my self-doubt and my struggles and stuff are just things that everyone deals with. And I'd love to, if there was a professional I could go to that could give me more context for that, Actually, I actually went to school to train to be a therapist myself 10 years ago. I was working in the film industry, and I was having therapy at the time, and I started to strongly feel that that's something that I would want to do as a career. And I feel that I have a natural aptitude for that as well. I've always been a kind of informal counselor to other people, and someone that people seem to feel they can confide in. And that's actually what started my journey in the US, because I actually applied to a school in California to study to be an arts therapist. I've always been very creative and artistic, and I had a deep interest in learning to be a therapist. This was 10 plus years ago. No, this was over 10 years ago. I was in my late 30s. Again, hadn't fully woken up, didn't fully understand my issues, but really felt strongly that I wanted to do this. And so I went out to San Francisco, and I went to start studying for my master's degree in arts therapy, with a view to becoming a practicing therapist. And long story short, I got a year into the program and I completely unraveled. I came apart at the seams, psychologically and emotionally. I think what it was is that I had this, it was such a grandiose feeling of, my God, I finally found my path. I finally found my calling. This is my niche. This is what I'm going to be good at. And I thought, this is great. I'm going back to school later in life. I'm so much more mature. I've worked through so much of my stuff. This is going to be the great college experience that I never had. This is going to be where I really blossom and come into myself. And so I go to this school, and I'm just so full of optimism and hope and excitement. And I'm so thrilled to be in the US, which is something I always wanted. And you know what I found? I found another group of people that I didn't fit into. I found another place where I felt like a misfit and an alien. I found another context where I couldn't find my feet. And and the other thing is that when you go to study to be a therapist, you are also going through you're in therapy yourself at the time, and all of your classes are kind of like versions of group therapy. You're doing different therapeutic modalities, so you are actually cracking yourself open. It's a bit like a boot camp, in the army, where they break you down and then build you back up again. Well, it's like a very gentle, loving, yogic, woo-woo version of boot camp. Where you crack open and you start deep diving into your own stuff as you're learning therapeutic theory, therapeutic practice. It's this big thing. And for a while, that was the greatest thing ever for me. I have a lot of resilience for therapy and for deep diving, and I loved it. It was rich. I was really getting into some deep stuff. I was, doing my own art therapy, and it was just fabulous. And as time went on, it became really clear to me that I'm just like, I feel like an outsider, like I can't fit with my cohort. And what was so painful was to see them forging these deep relationships with each other. I have a tissue at the ready because I know I'm going to cry over this because it's still so raw, even over 10 years later. They were forging friendships, they were forging relationships. And, I did make friends, but it just, I still felt so weird. Like I just couldn't, there was something that just wasn't connecting for me. And I broke down and I cried, and I actually went and sat on a fire escape outside to get away from them. And I was just like bawling my eyes out, like overwhelmed with how pathetic and sad my life was. Because it just, and what was interesting was that I couldn't ask for help from them. Like I was unable to tell them my experience because at that time I didn't have that context for what I'd been through. And I didn't know why I felt like that, why I felt so weird, when this should have been like this kind of glorious moment in my life where I was like achieving my goals and going back to school. And anyway, so that went on for like months. And eventually we were in this group therapy class, which was called Group Process, but it was group therapy by another name. And essentially what happened is that I basically lost it in the middle of that class, and I started like attacking everyone in the class. And I sort of in my kind of like dislocated way told them, I am so lonely, I don't have anybody, I don't feel like I fit in anywhere. And all of you are always just talking about your friends and your partners and all of this stuff that you have in your life. And I said, you know what? I said, this is like oppression, because you don't understand that there are people amongst you that like feel so lost and so isolated. And I feel, again, I was in California, right? So I picked up quite a lot of like the buzzwords. I feel oppressed by you. This group is oppressing me. It's funny now, right? It is funny. This is oppression because you don't understand that there are people every day who just see togetherness and they can't participate in that. And they're just like excluded from that. So I was like making a good point, but not in a very like good way. And there were people in that group that were like deeply, deeply offended by what I said, because I was mean about it. And, I basically offended so many people in that group because I said I was just so tired of hearing about their lives and their stupid relationships and stuff, and that I got kicked out of the group basically. And then people like weren't even like talking to me really, like some of them, and it was super awkward. And it was really interesting, Riley, because what I did is I basically like created my own self-fulfilling prophecy, which is my belief that I don't fit in anywhere and that no one will like me or accept me. And I literally made that happen. I made that come true. And shortly after that, I just crashed out of the program. And I remember that when I went back to sit with that head of the program after I said I was leaving, and I explained to her that I just found it unbearable to be around the members of my cohort, the same person that had said to me like a couple months before that I had one of the strongest therapeutic presences in the whole cohort, said to me that I'm probably not someone that somebody would want to sit with.
Oh no.
So that was really hard. So I guess I'm just saying that, and then later on, by reading about CPTSD, I understood that that's what had happened. It was my CPTSD, my triggers, all of the ways that I couldn't be around people, and all of my repeating patterns with people. You know, it like destroyed a whole opportunity that I had. That's kind of hard to come to terms with, you know, even still, it's tough.
Have you ever thought about trying to do that again?
People have asked me that a lot. Like, they're like, oh, that ship hasn't sailed, why don't you go back? And I don't know, I feel like that ship has sailed, to be honest with you. I mean, a lot of time has passed, and the financial implications of going back now would be really tough. It was a time in my life where I was able to kind of do that financially, and I just don't think I could now. And to be honest with you, as much ability as I know that I would have had in that field, and also knowing that there need to be a lot more therapists who are ExJWs, I think there are still levels where that really destroyed my confidence to do that. And it's sort of like the lights just went out on that potential path, you know? I don't think I could regain that trajectory again. But that was rough. Especially, you know, it's that thing of when people say in the groups, don't let this cult keep taking from you, you know? Don't let it keep robbing you. It already robbed you of X number of years. Don't let it rob you of more years. And I have to say, that is one of the most pertinent things that I would say to any ExJW is get the therapy you need right up front, do it early, and do it thoroughly. You know, don't think you can go it alone. You can't. Find the support somehow. Definitely have therapy early. Don't let this still be dogging you and haunting you decades later. Don't let it still be stealing from you decades later. Yeah, that was a hard lesson to learn. That I really thought I was, you know, well on the way to being healed, and I really wasn't. I had a whole other mountain range to climb over, you know. But again, I learned a lot. I learned a lot. I wonder when I'm going to graduate this school of learning how to manage my issues.
I just wish I could hug you through the screen. You know, I feel so bad for, you know, everything you've been through and everything that you're still going through. It does come across that you're much further along, you know, in your healing process than you were years and years ago. But, you know, as it is the case for all of us, there's still a long way to go.
There really is. And like you say, I don't think it ever ends. But I do believe that there is a point where you start to feel balanced enough, you know, in your kind of boat on the sea of life is balanced enough that you don't feel like it's listing, you don't feel like you're constantly having to bail water out. You can actually begin to sail, you know. I think I'm really getting close to that point. But I am definitely a testament to how, you know, if you don't get therapy, if you don't dig into this stuff as soon as possible after leaving, it really, yeah, it'll dog you. It really will. I would say to anybody, do the work, get into it, dig deep, do the work as soon as you can. I've done the work as soon as I've been able to, or as I've gleaned more understanding. The light has gotten brighter, so to speak. But it's taken a lot of years for that light to brighten, for me to understand more what I need to address and why I'm struggling with certain things, you know. The organization has ended up taking a lot more years from me in many ways than I should have allowed it to. But I will also say that I still got out at 19. I've had some great experiences that I've really wanted to have. You know, I've been free, and I've known freedom for many, many years. I may not have always, you know, utilized that freedom to its optimum, but my life ain't over yet, and I am still working towards that being the best that I can be, given where I've come from. It's fascinating to me seeing people leaving now and hearing their fresh stories while everything's fresh and they can remember all the detail, and hearing all the stuff that people go through, and you know, the similarities to my experience. That in itself is so healing. Just knowing that what I went through and what I experienced has been echoed through so many other people's lives in so many different contexts, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really warms my heart to hear you say that, your life isn't over. You've still got many years left ahead of you to, utilize your freedom in the best possible way, and to have a full and enriched life.
Definitely. And as I say, all of the things that I've done that I'm really happy about, and the freedom that I've had to do things over the years, even while dealing with, my internal struggles and stuff, it's all been worth it. And there are experiences that I would not exchange for the world. And, I am definitely continuing to learn how to live and how to be me, and also learning how to love myself and accept myself, and understanding that is at the root of so much stuff as well, and digging deeper into that, and really honoring what I've achieved, without necessarily the support I would have liked to have had, but I've achieved a lot, and and I'm still here. It's like, I have been seriously suicidal 3 times in my life, and I'm still here. I am a survivor, and I've survived this cult. Regardless of, regardless of struggling with the after effects, I have absolutely survived this cult, and this cult has no hold on me whatsoever.
I hope you're really proud of yourself for that. I really do.
Really proud.
Thank you so much for watching to the very end of the video. If you haven't already done so, please like, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. If you like my work and want to help me continue doing it, please support me on Patreon at patreon.com/Jexit_2020. And with that, I'd like to sincerely thank these very special patrons who make these videos possible.